Oh, hi there. This is a special video, well, not really special, but I'm making it particularly to talk with my Professor Mark Thoma. If you're out there, Mark, this one is especially for you, but I'm including it in my Bonneromics #2 on my list on my videos. So, anyway, it has to do with the fact that in our class, our economic thought class, we're talking about the same kind of stuff that is relevant to the question I'm going to be discussing tonight, which has to do with the capitalism and some of its flaws that have been pointed out over the years, and issues of fairness and of class struggle and how well the system works. Are there other better alternatives and such? Because I think a lot of people kind of divide into two radical camps. I mean, I'm sure there's people in the middle, but the two views we hear the most passionately about are, number one, you've got the hardcore Marxists and other various types of socialists who believe that capitalism cannot be reformed in any way to make it fairer or work better for the little people, that the only way to truly significantly help those who aren't really rich is to overthrow capitalism itself and set up a system that works based on common ownership of the economy. And then you have, on the opposite extreme, the types of attitudes that we heard during this past election cycle with regard to Joe the Plumber. You have a more extreme version, of course, and that would be things like Ayn Rand, which is the idea that a free market system and the way it distributes income and power is inherently fair, or maybe that it's not completely fair, but that every alternative to an extreme unregulated capitalism will do more harm than good. So it would be seen as the least of all possible evils to have an unregulated capitalism with no redistribution, very little welfare, and everybody basically fighting on their own to survive. It may not look too great, but there's no better alternative. The Tina attitude. And then you've got those out there on the right who also, because they believe that any form of redistribution or regulation is a restriction on their property rights, that the absolute right to private property and free enterprise must be fair, because any other system goes against those principles. It's hard to explain it, but it's kind of a psychological contradiction. The basic idea that their system of the Ayn Rand philosophy of absolute private property, absolute property rights, absolute free market rights, total economic freedom has to be fair because it's the only moral way to go. And that's a real flawed logic. I mean, I could do a separate video on objectivism, but I'm not going to do that today. And then you have this group in the middle. Paul Krugman is one of them. I suspect that you are one of them too, and I'm one of them, who believes that we basically like the efficiency and the productivity and the progress that's happened under capitalism. We've looked at the other systems like socialism, and or at least the attempts to establish socialism, and we've seen a big mess made, and we're trying to figure out, well, how can we make capitalism work better for the little people? There's some argument, like, for example, when it comes to income distribution, the marginalists, and we haven't gotten to them yet, would argue that you're paid the value of your marginal product, that must be fair. I would say, no, it's not fair, because the marginal point, it's possible that the average product could exceed the marginal product. In fact, if it doesn't, then how is the business going to profit? And but then that goes back to the whole point, well, how do you explain who gets credit for the productivity? If laborers produce all this wealth, how do you determine who produces what and who gets how much credit for what is produced, and how much value goes to the entrepreneurs, how much wealth creation credit can you give to the executives, and it gets real complicated. I would definitely argue that, for example, a firefighter versus a hedge fund manager, that's my classic example. Firefighters risk their lives every day. Hedge fund managers sit in a comfortable office room. The work that the hedge fund managers do might require more special training and a lot more studying and such, and it's a lot of risk that you're having, putting them in charge of something that's very risky, and a lot of wealth is at stake. So I can understand why there'd be some inequality there, but what I don't understand is the extreme level of inequality we see. Where does that come from? I don't think that it can be entirely explained by marginal product of labor. I do think that what Marx says about the exploitation of workers for surplus, because the owners are in a power position and they can exploit the non-owning class, use their power of ownership to get more than they deserve, and while the working class gets less than it deserves. I think there's a lot of truth to that. Maybe not as far as Marx would have argued, but I think there's a lot of truth for that, and therefore there is a case for, I say, redistributing from the powerful and privileged within an economic order, and giving not just to people necessarily who don't work, but people who do work and are unfairly underpaid. That way you are correcting some of the inherent injustices in capitalism and ensuring that people who work hard for a living are given a fair chance to succeed, and their outcomes of people's lives and standards of living are not based heavily upon luck or upon something else. There's some other things I could go into in this video. For example, I have a theory of what to do about regulatory policy, which I believe that we should use tax incentives, punitive taxes and tax credits and subsidies to punish certain types of economic behavior and reward others, kind of a carrot and stick, a gentle carrot and stick, because you're not forced to do anything. It's a soft carrot and a soft stick in order to kind of steer businesses and consumers in a good direction when it comes to the environment, when it comes to urban sprawl, when it comes to mass transit. There's a lot of energy, again, a lot of things that we could do, even paying living wages. You could use tax incentives in a lot of cases to steer economic behavior in a direction that you want to. There's a lot of options out there for those who want progressive change in the economic system. One thing that they all have in common is they all represent a shift away from the, I wouldn't go as far as to say laissez-faire paradigm, but the doctrine of the Republican Party over the last 28 years, which is that the best thing to do for the economy and for society as a whole is to let the elite class, Wall Street, big business, wealthy, super wealthy individuals do whatever the hell they want, get out of their way, and somehow their actions and their efforts to make themselves richer will help everyone else and lead the society along a good course. I don't believe that. No amount of conservative propaganda can convince me otherwise, and I will fight to bring about the changes that I believe are good for society. You can disagree. We'll duke it out in the political system. And I'm not meaning this personally to you, Mark. I mean, probably you agree with more of my stuff than you would disagree with. But I'm just, anyone else that's reading out there, feel free to disagree. That's one of the wonderful things about this country, is debate. But it's one thing to have opinions. Using the opinions, fighting for what you believe in, there will have to be some confrontation. And let's hope, I don't mean violent confrontation, but there will be two sides who disagree, both of them trying to get their way through the political system at the expense, in such a way that the other group can't get its way, because their conflicts of agendas conflict with each other, and both sides can't have everything they want. Sometimes we can compromise in such a way where both sides get, say, 70–80% of what they want, but quite often it's just a struggle for who gets their way, and there's no real effort to compromise because there's no win-win solutions. But whatever. I mainly wanted to focus on this economic theory of what is wrong with capitalism, if anything, and I definitely would say that this under-regulation, assuming that the free market will solve everything, and that the distribution of income is completely fair without a little bit of redistribution to fix things, is the problem. And we've assumed that Marx is the only answer to the injustice, is kind of a real flaw, because other economists besides Marx were concerned about class inequality. And I think that we don't give enough credit to Smith and Ricardo, who are worried about the excesses of capitalism. Instead, conservatives love to stand up there and flaunt Adam Smith and Ricardo as one of their own without realizing that the values on a lot of issues were quite different. Anyway, hope the midterm goes well. Thanks.